Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For today's episode, my interview guest runs the BookThinkers book marketing services company and is the author of the book Rise of the Reader, which is a nonfiction book offering advice on how to apply what one learns from reading books, particularly personal development books. His name is Nick Hutchison, and here's my interview with Nick. Nick Hutchison, welcome to Apollo Papyrus.
I'm excited to be here, Aaron. Thank you for hosting me.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. So my name, as you mentioned, is Nick Hutchison. I live in the Boston, Massachusetts area. I just turned 30 years old, the big 30, and I'm the founder of a company called BookThinkers. We help mission-driven nonfiction authors promote and market their books with short-form video content, podcast booking, and a whole bunch of other cool services. I also host a podcast called BookThinkers Life-Changing Books, where I've had the chance to interview so many of my favorite authors. Now, finally, to kind of wrap up this long introduction, I just put out my first book called Rise of the Reader, Strategies for Mastering Your Reading Habits and Applying What You Learn. And I decided to write this book because over the years of building my community, I had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people asking me, Nick, how do I take great notes, choose the right book, implement more from what I'm reading, kind of in this world of personal development books. And I just decided, you know what, I've got to write the book on it. So that's who I am, Aaron, and I'm excited to see what you want to talk about today.
I'll start with your book, Rise of the Reader, without spoiling too much of your book. What is it about?
Well, it's about how to get more from these books, because here's the deal. In the world of nonfiction, personal development, business, philosophy, psychology style books, these books are condensing decades of somebody else's greatest life lessons and lived experience into days of consumption. But the secret is, unless you implement what you've learned and change your behavior, then nothing happens. I like to give the following metaphor. Imagine you wanted to make the world's best chicken parm, right? That's one of my favorite dishes, chicken parm. So you do some research, you get a recipe book just on chicken parm. You read the whole thing, backwards, forwards, up, down, left, right. You know every word of every page. It's dog-eared, coffee stains, highlighter all over it. You even buy the ingredients, but you never make the chicken parm. Like, that would seem pretty weird, right? Like, what a shame. You wouldn't know how it tastes. Yet people buy books on personal finance and they don't budget. They buy books on health and fitness and they don't diet. They buy books on starting businesses and they never start a business. And so I'm looking to solve that problem, Aaron. I want people to use the information that they're learning in these wonderful books and change their behavior. And that's what I teach inside of my book, Rise of the Reader.
How long did it take you to write Rise of the Reader?
That's a great question. I thought, because I'm such a disciplined person, that I could just set that I could just set 1 hour in the morning aside 5 days a week and get the book done in a few months. But it actually took me about 3 years from start to finish. So I started the project about 3.5 years ago. And I had a little bit of initial momentum, but very quickly, my business took priority, life took priority, and I would go months without writing anything. And then as the questions would pile up from my community, just more and more and more people asking me the same questions, I would always envision just being able to hand them a copy of the book. But that wouldn't happen, right? Because I wasn't writing and I didn't have the book done. So to answer your question and again, wrap things up without rambling too much, it was a hard process. And it took me about 3 years from start to finish, but I'm so happy that it's out there now and making a positive impact.
Is Rise of the Reader, is that self-published, traditionally published, or published via a hybrid press?
It is self-published, although I did leverage a wonderful company called Book Launchers, similar to my company, BookThinkers, but Book Launchers. They are a self-publishing services company. So you could consider it almost closer to hybrid because my book did go through the standard developmental editing, proofreading, fact checking, professional layout, cover, all that kind of stuff. But I did retain the IP, and it is, currently uploaded and distributed through KDP. So self-published, but I decided to work with a company that could really help me do it the right way.
Mm, I'm assuming IP is an acronym meaning intellectual property. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. You founded the BookThinkers platform, as you mentioned in your response to the previous question. What services does BookThinkers provide?
Well, I'll tell you a quick backstory. So I started this company actually by accident, Aaron, because I was a recent college graduate. I was working a full-time software sales job, and I was reading books on sales and marketing, persuasion, negotiation, communication, everything, and applying them to my role and experiencing a lot of success. But no matter how much success I was experiencing, financial or otherwise, my friends and family, they just didn't want to read these books. Nobody wanted to read them. So I turned to social media and I started sharing the books I was reading. And I attempted to monetize my love of books a few different ways that didn't work out. But ultimately, authors started to reach out to me and offer to pay for book reviews. Right. And so the logic was that if I talked about the book and I had a big audience, maybe I could sell some copies. And it worked. And so that was the first service that we decided to offer. And over the years, we tried out a heck of a lot of different things that didn't work or that we just weren't good at. But we found a few things that do work. So today, there's really three core things that my agency does for nonfiction and personal development style authors. Number one is short form video content, where we fly out to an author with the cameras and the lighting, and we help them turn their physical paper book into either 50 or 100 pieces of professional video content for social media, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, that type of thing. And that typically helps them generate a larger audience, sell a bunch of books, but also it helps them get customers for their complementary products and services. A lot of people in the personal development space, they do coaching, consulting, speaking, courses, things like that. And so we help generate a little bit more attention on socials. So that's number one. Number two is podcast booking. So we place authors on good podcasts to talk about their good books. And we do a bunch of matchmaking behind the scenes. And then number three, book reviews. We still have an audience today. Now it's quite a bit bigger, hundreds of thousands of people across our different platforms. And we post a new book recommendation every day of the week. So great question. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to share that, Aaron.
You host a podcast that's part of your BookThinkers platform called BookThinkers Life-Changing Books. What can listeners expect from a typical episode of your podcast?
Well, when I started building my community and I was doing book reviews, I noticed some of my favorite authors. They started following the account and sharing some of our content, engaging with it. And so I had follow-up questions like most of us do when we read these great books. And so I thought, you know what, maybe I can reach out. Maybe I could talk to some of these people. And why not record the conversations? Why not make these conversations available for everybody that's reading these books? So that's kind of how the podcast started. Each and every episode is with a world-class nonfiction, business, or personal development type author. A lot of these people are business owners, they're entrepreneurs, and they're consolidating, again, decades of their lived experience into days of reading. And so there's so much value in these books. And what I'm trying to do is give the audience a free preview. Use my podcast as a book discovery tool. If you listen to my show and my interview with the author, by the end of the episode, you'll know whether or not this book is going to be a good fit for you. And so that's my goal with the show.
Now I'm going to ask a question here about a couple different types of books that might be one and the same. Is there a difference between a self-help book and a personal development book, or are the terms synonymous?
I think they're pretty synonymous. Self-help as a term has some bad connotations to it. I think people think of like woo-woo spirituality, kind of the secret, affirmations in the mirror. Whereas personal and professional development is a little bit more of a mature term, but they pretty much mean the same thing. I think when people like me talk about personal or professional development, we're talking about doing the work, right? The hard work, implementing skills, solving problems, building our mindset, not just kind of the self-help woo-woo stuff.
When and why did you start reading personal development books?
Well, I started because I took an internship going into my senior year of college at a local software company. And my boss at the time, Kyle, he recognized some unfulfilled potential in me. That's probably a nice way to say it. I was sort of a know-it-all 20-year-old college kid, and I was commuting an hour each way to work 5 days a week, right? So 10 hours in the car every week. And I was just listening to music. And Kyle, one day, he said to me, Nick, listen, listening to the same music or the same playlist, the same song or radio station for the 1000th time, it's not going to get you closer to where you want to be in life, personally or professionally, but the right podcast might. So I actually started, Aaron, by listening to podcasts. And as I was listening to these business style podcasts, so many of the people being interviewed, right, these successful people who had great relationships, they were healthy, they had a lot of money in the bank, they were giving a lot of credit to the books that they were reading. And so I just kind of took the hint after a while. I was like, you know what? I'm not really much of a reader, right? I'm not much of an academic, but I should give some of these books a shot. And so I went to my local Barnes and Noble, and I had heard some of the same titles over and over and over again. So I sort of located them immediately, and I saw some of those titles, and I bought them, and I started reading, and I haven't looked back. I've been reading anywhere between 50 to 100 books every year for the last 10 years.
One final question. What is your best advice from someone who is struggling to retain information learned from reading a book?
Repetition leads to retention. That's my best piece of advice. Repetition leads to retention. So if you think you're going to read a book one time, not take any notes, not revisit it, and implement it or retain it, I think that that's kind of far-fetched. I think what we need to do is be very intentional about what our goal is for each one of these personal development or nonfiction style books. We then need to read the book with that intention and take notes. As we take notes and we rewrite our favorite takeaways, that's a form of repetition. So first, rewrite it on a yellow legal pad, a physical notebook, whatever the case is. It's a multi-sensory experience. Then rewrite it in an online notebook in case you lose your physical one, right? That's another form of repetition. And revisit that information. Try to teach it to your friends and family. Again, another form of repetition. Because if you can teach it to other people, it forces you to kind of simplify and reorganize the information in your brain. When you verbalize it, that's another form of repetition. And that's the best way, I think, to internalize something so that you don't forget it. And again, try to revisit your notes as often as possible. And the more often you revisit them, the more likely you are to form a solid neural connection to that information and where it's stored so that you can revisit it with ease.
Nick, thank you for appearing on Apollo Papyrus. You are a very insightful person.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Nick was a fantastic guest, and I'll include a link to the podcast he hosts in the text description of this episode. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write and read your passion. Bye for now. Remember to subscribe to the Apollo Papyrus YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/@ApolloPapyrus and the Apollo Papyrus Substack newsletter at apollopapyrus.substack.com. Y'all can visit the Apollo Papyrus website at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/Apollo Papyrus and follow Apollo Papyrus on Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr at Apollo Papyrus. Copyright copyright 2024 Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.